The gavel echoed through the courtroom as I collapsed to the cold marble floor. Everything went black, but not before I saw the horror on the judge's face and heard my sister Sarah frantically emptying her purse. The irony wasn't lost on me. For 28 years, my family had called me dramatic about my epilepsy. Now, in front of a federal judge, my body was proving just how real my condition truly was. But let me start from the beginning, because this story isn't just about a seizure in a courtroom. It's about a lifetime of being told that my medical needs were less important than keeping the peace. My name is Madison, and I've been living with epilepsy since I was 12 years old. Most people think epilepsy is just seizures, but it's so much more than that. It's the constant medication schedule, the sleep monitoring, the dietary restrictions, and above all, it's the pills that keep my brain chemistry stable. Without them, I'm not just uncomfortable, I'm in genuine danger. Growing up in the Walsh household, you'd think having a medical condition would earn you some extra care and attention. You'd be wrong. My parents, Robert and Linda Walsh, had a very different philosophy. Sharing is caring, they'd say, whenever my older sister Sarah wanted something of mine. And apparently, that philosophy extended to my life-saving medication. I still remember the first time it happened. I was 16, getting ready for my SATs the next morning. I went to take my evening dose of Lamictal, the medication that kept my seizures under control, and found my pill organizer completely empty, not just low, empty. "Mom," I called out, panic rising in my voice. "Did you move my medication?" She appeared in my doorway with that exasperated look I knew too well. "Madison, don't be so dramatic. Sarah had a really stressful week with her college applications. She just took a few to help her sleep." "A few?" I held up the empty container. "She took everything!" "And Mum, these aren't sleeping pills. They're anti-seizure medication. They could actually hurt her, and without them, I could have a seizure." My mother's expression didn't change. "Stop being so selfish. Your sister is going through a hard time, and family helps family. Besides, you haven't had a seizure in months. You'll be fine for one night." That night, I wasn't fine. I woke up on my bedroom floor at 3 a.m., my tongue bleeding, and my SAT prep books scattered around me. By the time my parents found me, I'd already missed the worst of it. The ambulance ride, the hospital stay, the concerned looks from doctors who couldn't understand why a compliant epilepsy patient would suddenly stop taking her medication. Sarah got into Harvard that fall. I had to retake my SATs 6 months later. You might think that incident would have been a wake-up call for my family. Instead, it became the template for the next 12 years of my life. Sarah needed my medication for stress relief. Sarah needed my medication to help her focus during law school finals. Sarah needed my medication because her new job was overwhelming. And every time I protested, every time I tried to explain that these weren't vitamins or anxiety pills, but carefully calibrated anti-seizure medication, I was met with the same response. "Stop being so dramatic about your condition." The worst part wasn't just the stolen medication. It was the systematic way my family minimized everything about my epilepsy. When I had breakthrough seizures because my medication levels were inconsistent, they'd tell relatives I was having one of her episodes. When I couldn't attend late-night events because disrupted sleep was a trigger, I was being antisocial. When I had to follow a strict medication schedule, I was being rigid and controlling. My 21st birthday perfectly encapsulated how little my health mattered to them. Sarah had planned a surprise party for me. How thoughtful, right? Except she'd planned it for 11 p.m. at a loud nightclub, knowing full well that late nights and flashing lights were major seizure triggers for me. When I tried to suggest celebrating earlier in the day at a quieter venue, my mother pulled me aside. "Madison, your sister worked really hard to plan this party. Don't ruin it by being difficult about your condition. Just this once, can't you try to be normal?" Normal. That word haunted me for years. As if wanting to avoid having a grand mal seizure in public made me abnormal. As if protecting my brain health was somehow selfish. I spent my 21st birthday in the emergency room after collapsing on the dance floor. While my family told the doctors I'd probably just had too much to drink, they actually seemed disappointed when my blood alcohol level came back completely normal. And the real culprit was revealed. Sarah had taken my evening medications earlier that day to calm her nerves about the party planning. By my mid-20s, I developed what I now recognize as a trauma response around my medication. I started hiding pills in different locations throughout my apartment, creating backup stashes that Sarah couldn't find all at once. I set multiple alarms on my phone to remind me to take my medication before she could get to it. I even started carrying a day's worth of pills with me everywhere I went. But Sarah was clever. She'd learned my patterns over the years, and she always seemed to be one step ahead. She convinced my parents to give her a spare key to my apartment for emergencies, then use it to search for my hidden medication. She'd time her visits for when I was in the shower or asleep. She'd even go through my purse during family dinners, claiming she was just borrowing a mint. The gaslighting was almost worse than the theft itself. When I'd confront her about missing pills, she'd look genuinely confused. "Madison, I think you're miscounting. Maybe you forgot you already took them." When I'd show her the empty bottles, she'd suggest I was becoming obsessive about my medication and needed to learn to relax. My parents always took her side. "Sarah would never do something that could hurt you," my father would say. "Maybe you should talk to your doctor about adjusting your dosage if you're running out so quickly." The cruel irony was that Sarah was a successful attorney by this point. She understood better than most people the serious legal and medical implications of what she was doing, but she also understood how to manipulate situations to her advantage. And she'd spent 28 years learning exactly which buttons to push with our parents. Everything changed when my grandmother passed away last year. Grandma Rose had always been different from my parents. She'd taken my epilepsy seriously, made sure I had my medication when I visited, and never made me feel broken or dramatic for having a medical condition. She was the one person in my family who consistently treated me like I mattered. When the will was read, I was shocked to learn that Grandma Rose had left me a substantial inheritance. Not just money, but also her house and several investment properties. The will specifically stated that these assets were for Madison's medical care and future security, recognizing the additional challenges she faces due to her health condition. My parents were furious, not because they felt entitled to the inheritance themselves, but because they couldn't understand why Grandma Rose would give so much to the sick one when Sarah was clearly the more successful child. They immediately began pressuring me to share the inheritance equally with Sarah. "It's not fair," my mother said during one particularly heated family dinner. "Sarah worked so hard to become a lawyer, and now Madison gets rewarded for being sick?" Grandma Rose must have been confused in her final years. But I'd learned something important from years of having my medication stolen. Sometimes protecting yourself isn't selfish, it's survival. I refused to split the inheritance, and my parents decided to contest the will in court. That's how I found myself hiring my own attorney for the first time in my life. Jennifer Chen was a sharp, no-nonsense lawyer who specialized in estate disputes. During our first meeting, I explained not just the inheritance situation, but the pattern of medication theft that had been going on for years. "Madison," she said, looking up from her notes with concern, "what your sister has been doing is incredibly dangerous. Taking someone else's prescription medication without their knowledge could be considered assault, especially when it puts your health at risk. Have you ever documented these incidents?" I realized with a sinking feeling that I hadn't. I'd been so focused on just surviving each day, on finding new places to hide my medication and new ways to protect myself, that I'd never thought to create a paper trail. In my family, where my medical needs were constantly minimized, it had never occurred to me that what Sarah was doing might actually be illegal. "We need to start documenting everything," Jennifer advised. "Keep a medication log, take photos of empty bottles, save any text messages or emails related to these incidents. If this case goes to court, we'll need evidence." For the first time in years, I felt like someone was taking my situation seriously. Jennifer didn't tell me I was being dramatic or selfish. She didn't suggest that I should just work things out with my family. Instead, she treated the medication theft as the serious crime it was and helped me understand that I had legal rights that had been violated for years. As we prepared for the court case, I started to feel something I hadn't experienced in a long time: hope. Maybe I could finally break free from the cycle of abuse and manipulation that had defined my relationship with my family. Maybe I could build a life where my health and safety actually mattered. I had no idea that Sarah was already planning her most dangerous escalation yet. The night before our court date, she would make a choice that would expose the truth about our family dynamic in the most public way possible. And this time there would be witnesses who couldn't be manipulated or gaslit into ignoring what they'd seen. The stage was set for a confrontation that would change everything. But first, I had to survive what Sarah had planned for me in that courthouse. The night before our court date, I felt more prepared than I had in years. Jennifer and I had spent weeks building our case, documenting every incident I could remember, and gathering medical records that proved the severity of my condition. For the first time, I wasn't going into a confrontation with my family empty-handed. I laid out my court outfit carefully, a navy blue dress that looked professional but not overly formal. More importantly, I organised my medications for the next day. My morning dose of Lamictal, my afternoon backup dose in case the hearing ran long, and my evening dose for when I got home. I'd learned to be meticulous about my medication schedule, especially during stressful periods when my seizure threshold was lower. That's when I heard my apartment door open. "Madison, it's just me," Sarah's voice rang out cheerfully. She had a key, of course. Our parents had given her 1 year ago for emergencies, and I'd never had the courage to ask for it back. She appeared in my bedroom doorway with that smile I'd learned to distrust. Too bright, too innocent. I thought I'd stop by to see how you're feeling about tomorrow. I know court can be stressful. I instinctively moved closer to my nightstand where my pill organizer sat. I'm fine, Sarah. Actually, I was just about to go to bed early. Big day tomorrow. Oh, come on, we're family. Can't we talk about this like adults? She sat down on my bed uninvited, her eyes scanning my room. You know Mum and Dad are really hurt that it's come to this. Grandma Rose never would have wanted us fighting over money. This isn't about money, I said quietly. It's about respect. It's about finally being treated like my health and my needs matter. Sarah's expression shifted slightly, the mask slipping just enough for me to see the calculation underneath. Madison, you know I've always looked out for you. Remember when you had that seizure at your birthday party? I was the one who called 911. You were also the one who took my medication that day, I replied, surprised by my own boldness. I think you're misremembering things, she said smoothly. Stress can affect memory, you know. Maybe you should take something to help you relax tonight. I watched in horror as her hand moved toward my pill organizer. Sarah, don't. Please, I need those for tomorrow. Just 1 or 2, she said, already opening the container. You have plenty, and I'm really anxious about tomorrow. Surely you can share with your sister. No. The word came out stronger than I expected. Those aren't anxiety medications, Sarah. They're anti-seizure drugs. They could actually hurt you, and without them, I could have a seizure in court tomorrow. But she was already pocketing several pills, her movements quick and practiced. Stop being so dramatic about your condition, Madison. You'll be fine for 1 day. I felt the familiar helplessness wash over me. But this time, something was different. This time, I had Jennifer's words echoing in my mind. What your sister has been doing is incredibly dangerous and potentially illegal. Sarah, if you take those pills, I'm calling the police. She laughed, actually laughed. And tell them what? That your sister borrowed some medication? Madison, who do you think they'll believe? A successful attorney or someone with a history of medical episodes? After she left, I sat on my bed staring at my nearly empty pill organizer. I had enough for my morning dose, but that was it. The pharmacy was already closed, and even if it were open, getting an emergency refill on a controlled substance over the weekend would be nearly impossible without a significant medical emergency. I called Jennifer, my hands shaking as I dialed. Madison, what's wrong? She took them, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Sarah came over and took most of my medication for tomorrow. I don't have enough for the full day. There was a long pause. Madison, this is serious. Without your medication, appearing in court could be dangerous for you. We should consider requesting a postponement. No, I said firmly. If we postpone, she wins. She gets to control my life with the threat of stealing my medication whenever it's convenient for her. I'm done letting her have that power. Are you sure? I'm worried about your safety. I'll be careful. I'll take my morning dose and hope the hearing doesn't run too long. And Jennifer, this time there will be witnesses. The next morning I felt the familiar anxiety that came with having an inconsistent medication level in my system. My hands were slightly shaky, and I could feel that electrical sensation in my brain that usually preceded problems. But I was determined not to let Sarah's sabotage derail the most important day of my legal life. The courthouse was imposing, all marble columns and high ceilings that seemed designed to make people feel small. I met Jennifer in the lobby, and she immediately noticed my pale complexion. "Madison, you don't look well. Are you sure about this?" "I'm as sure as I can be," I replied. "Let's just get through this." We entered the courtroom, and I saw my family for the first time in months. My parents sat behind Sarah, presenting a united front as always. Sarah herself looked perfectly composed in an expensive black suit, every inch the successful attorney. When she saw me, she smiled and gave a little wave, as if this were a friendly family gathering instead of a legal battle. Judge Patricia Hendricks took the bench promptly at 9 a.m. She was an older woman with steel grey hair and the kind of presence that immediately commanded respect. Jennifer had warned me that Judge Hendricks was known for running an efficient courtroom and having little patience for family drama. "This is the matter of the estate of Rose Walsh," Judge Hendricks announced. "I understand there's a dispute regarding the distribution of assets to the deceased's granddaughter, Madison Walsh." Sarah's attorney, a slick-looking man in his 50s, stood up first. "Your Honour, we contend that the deceased was not of sound mind when she made these bequests. The bulk of her estate was left to a granddaughter who, frankly, has had ongoing health issues that may have influenced the deceased's perception of her needs." I felt my anger spike at his casual dismissal of my epilepsy as merely health issues. But Jennifer squeezed my hand under the table. "Furthermore," Sarah's attorney continued, "we have evidence that Madison Walsh has a history of medication dependency and erratic behaviour that suggests she may not be capable of managing such a substantial inheritance." That's when I felt the first warning sign, a slight tingling in my left hand that I recognised as an aura. My seizures often started this way, with sensory changes that preceded the main event by anywhere from a few minutes to an hour. I tried to stay calm and focus on Jennifer's voice as she stood to present our case. "Your Honour, what we have here is a clear case of a family attempting to disinherit someone based on medical discrimination. Madison Walsh has been managing her epilepsy successfully for over 15 years. Her grandmother's decision to leave her these assets was based on a realistic understanding of the additional challenges and expenses that come with managing a chronic medical condition. As Jennifer spoke, I noticed Sarah fidgeting in her seat, occasionally reaching into her purse. The tingling in my hand was getting stronger, spreading up my arm. I knew I was in trouble, but I was determined to see this through. "We also have documentation," Jennifer continued, "of a pattern of medication theft by the plaintiff's sister, which has resulted in multiple emergency medical situations over the years." "Objection!" Sarah's attorney jumped up. "These are unsubstantiated accusations with no bearing on the deceased's mental capacity at the time the will was written." "Sustained," Judge Hendricks said, but I noticed her sharp eyes focusing on Sarah with interest. The hearing continued for another hour, with both sides presenting their arguments. I could feel my symptoms getting progressively worse. The tingling had spread to both hands, and I was starting to experience that strange, metallic taste in my mouth that always preceded a seizure. But we were so close to the end, and I was determined not to give Sarah the satisfaction of seeing me collapse. That's when Judge Hendricks asked me to stand and address the court directly. Ms. Walsh, I'd like to hear from you about your relationship with your grandmother and her decision to leave you these assets. I stood up slowly, gripping the table for support. Your Honour, my grandmother was the only person in my family who ever took my epilepsy seriously. She understood that managing this condition requires consistency, support, and sometimes extra resources for medical care. My voice was starting to sound strange to my own ears, slightly slurred. I could see Jennifer looking at me with concern. She also understood, I continued, fighting to get the words out clearly, that I needed someone who would prioritise my health and safety rather than treating my medical needs as inconvenient or... The world started to tilt. I gripped the table harder, but I could feel my coordination failing. The familiar electrical storm was building in my brain, and I knew I had seconds before I lost consciousness entirely. Your Honour, I managed to say, I think I need to bukitias. That's when everything went black. I came back to awareness slowly, lying on the courthouse floor with paramedics kneeling beside me. There were voices above me, urgent professional medical voices, asking questions about my medication and medical history. But there was another voice, too, panicked and defensive. I don't know why she's having a seizure, Sarah was saying. She takes medication for this. She should be fine. Ma'am, when did she last take her anti-seizure medication? One of the paramedics asked. I don't know. Last night, I assume? No, I managed to whisper, still disoriented but conscious enough to speak. This morning, only this morning. The paramedic looked confused. Ma'am, if you have epilepsy, you should be taking medication multiple times a day. What happened to your other doses? Before I could answer, I heard Judge Hendricks' voice, sharp and commanding. Everyone step back. Paramedics, continue your assessment. Bailiff, please secure any personal belongings that may have spilled during the incident. That's when I heard the sound that changed everything, the distinct rattle of pills scattering across the marble floor. Ma'am, the bailiff said to Sarah, these appear to have fallen from your purse. Are these your medications? There was a long, terrible silence. Sarah started, but Judge Hendricks cut her off. Bailiff, please bag those pills as evidence. Paramedics, I need you to identify what medications are present. The paramedic picked up one of the scattered pills and examined it. This is Lamictal, 200 milligrams. It's an anti-seizure medication. He looked at me with understanding dawning in his eyes. Ma'am, is this your medication? Yes, I whispered. Judge Hendricks' voice was like ice. Ms. Sarah Walsh, approach the bench immediately. The rest of you, clear the courtroom except for essential personnel and the plaintiff. As the paramedics helped me sit up and checked my vital signs, I watched my sister's carefully constructed facade crumble in real time. Her face had gone completely white, and she was stammering explanations that made no sense. Your Honour, I can explain. Madison gets anxious before big events, and I just thought... You thought you would steal your sister's life-saving medication? Judge Hendricks' voice could have cut glass. Ms. Walsh, do you understand that what you've just done could constitute assault? that you deliberately put your sister's life at risk to sabotage these proceedings? My parents, who had been silent during my medical emergency, finally found their voices. "Your Honour, there must be some misunderstanding," my father said. "Sarah would never hurt Madison. They're sisters." Judge Hendricks turned her steely gaze on them. "Mr. and Mrs. Walsh, your daughter just had a grand mal seizure in my courtroom because someone stole her medication, and that medication was found in your other daughter's possession. What part of this is a misunderstanding?" The paramedic was taking my blood pressure and asking me questions about my medical history. When he learned that I should have had medication in my system but didn't due to theft, his expression grew grim. "Judge, this is a serious medical situation. Deliberately withholding anti-seizure medication from someone with epilepsy is extremely dangerous. It could have resulted in status epilepticus, which can be fatal." I watched as my parents' faces finally registered the gravity of what had happened. For the first time in my adult life, they couldn't dismiss my medical emergency as being dramatic. There were too many witnesses, too much official documentation, and too much evidence scattered across the courtroom floor. "Your Honour," Jennifer said, stepping forward, "we request that this incident be documented as part of the court record. This represents a clear pattern of endangerment that supports our client's need for independent control of her inheritance." Judge Hendricks nodded grimly. "Ms. Chen, I'm granting your request. Furthermore, I'm ordering a recess while Ms. Madison Walsh receives proper medical care. When we reconvene, I'll be making my decision on this inheritance dispute. And I'll also be considering whether criminal charges should be filed regarding today's incident." As the paramedics helped me to my feet to escort me to the hospital for observation, I caught Sarah's eye one last time. The mask was completely gone now, replaced by something desperate and ugly. For 28 years, she'd been able to steal my medication and face no consequences. Today, she'd finally been caught in the act by people who couldn't be manipulated or gaslight. "Madison, please," she whispered as I passed her. "I was just trying to help you stay calm. I never meant for this to happen." But I was done listening to her excuses. For the first time in my life, I had witnesses who understood exactly what she'd done and why it was dangerous. I had medical professionals documenting the theft and its consequences. Most importantly, I had a judge who had seen firsthand how my family had been putting my life at risk for years. As we left the courtroom, I heard Judge Hendricks addressing my parents in a tone that brooked no argument. "Mr. and Mrs. Walsh will be reconvening tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. I suggest you spend tonight thinking very carefully about your family dynamics and what kind of testimony you want to give about your daughter's relationship. Because based on what I've witnessed today, there will be some very serious questions about your role in enabling this dangerous behaviour. The truth was finally out and there was no going back.